I've been asked to ask you not to smoke and not to use flashbulbs, please. This is a poetry reading by Erica Jong. It's being presented by the Poetry Center, by Poets and Writers Incorporated, and the Department of English at Stony Brook. Erica was born in New York City. She's a graduate of Barnard College and Columbia University. There are 3 volumes of her poems: Fruits and Vegetables, 1971, Half-Lives, and Love Root.
That's a nice angle.
Her novel, Fear of Flying, was published in 1973.
Camera 1, tight shot.
All the angles.
All of you know about that. I think it's been translated into 20 languages.
Tight, center them. Let's go.
There's a second novel
Tilt down. Mike, I need a little more than one.
coming out
Tilt
next
down
month,
Hold it too much.
titled How to
Right
Save
there.
Your Own Life.
Too much.
Am I imagining
Hold
it, or is there an echo? I don't mind an echo, but it doesn't sound like my echo. You may not know it, but this is Erica's second poetry reading at Stony Brook. She gave one in 1973 in a particularly chilly corner of the campus with about 12 and a half devoted members of the poetry community listening to her. That was about a month before she published Fear of Flying. I think we're very lucky to get her here again. As you know, her poems have been published widely in many magazines and anthologies and have been praised by critics. What's probably more significant is that they've been praised by fellow poets. Her outspokenness and humor have been praised. She's able to say exactly what she means. To read Erica Jong's poems, and then to turn back to the kind of poetry American poets were writing 20 years ago, when there seemed to be so many things you were not able to say or permitted to say, and only so many ways in which you could say what you had to say, is to see a great difference between this generation of American poets and the last, and to see also that American poetry has come a long way from English poetry. But all this is very solemn, and Erica is very lively. I thought we'd start our series this year with a lively reading. Here is Erica.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh my God, it's very... I must explain to you first that I'm staring at extremely bright lights and you're all in darkness, and also that my name is pronounced Jong, for those of you who are wondering. I wasn't born with this name. I acquired it in a marriage, but now I'm stuck with it. But it is pronounced Jong, and I've grown to kind of like it. It's a nice name. It's strange. No other poet has that name, and nobody knows how to pronounce it. People call me Yang, Yong, Jong, Sang, Wong. Some book reviewers even call me Long for some reason. They seem not to have read me, even the title page of the book. Every poet has a poem that's become totally notorious and which from time to time she wishes she hadn't written. And for me, that poem is 17 Warnings in Search of a Feminist Poem. I have a sense of humor and a sense of irony, I think, and it is my tragedy as a writer always to be taken literally when I mean things ironically. Here's a poem that I wrote to satirize all the different things in the women's movement. The women's movement is a very serious and very important movement, but it's also a very funny movement. What could be funnier than women feuding with each other about how to be a good feminist? What could be funnier than men's threatened reactions to something which is so evidently needed in this society, that is equality between the sexes? So I wrote a poem really to satirize all the different things about the women's movement, which I found very funny. And like so many things that I've done, it was taken absolutely literally. I hope that this audience will understand it with the humor with which it was intended. 17 Warnings in Search of a Feminist Poem. Beware of the man who denounces ambition. His fingers itch under his gloves. Beware of the man who denounces war through clenched teeth. Beware of the man who denounces women writers. His penis is tiny and cannot spell. Beware of the man who wants to protect you. He will protect you from everything but himself. Beware of the man who loves to cook. He will fill your kitchen with greasy pots. Beware of the man who loves your soul. He is a bullshitter. Beware of the man who denounces his mother. He is a son of a bitch. Beware of the man who spells son of a bitch as one word. He is a hack. Beware of the man who loves death too well. He is taking out insurance. Beware of the man who loves life too well. He is a fool. Beware of the man who denounces psychiatrists. He is afraid. Beware of the man who trusts psychiatrists. He is in hock. Beware of the man who picks your dresses. He wants to wear them. Beware of the man you think is harmless. He will surprise you. Beware of the man who cares for nothing but books. He will run like a trickle of ink. Beware of the man who writes flowery love letters. He is preparing for years of silence. Beware of the man who praises liberated women. He is planning to quit his job. They always do quit their job. It's true. I'm going to read a poem from my first book, Fruits and Vegetables. It's a poem that I'm still extremely fond of, though I wrote it over 10 years ago, I think. It was written as a spoof on the American Institution of Marriage, and it's called Here Comes. And what I do is I take a sample issue of Broad's magazine, and I flip through it in the poem. And Broad's magazine is a very curious magazine because, as you all know, it seems not to have much to do with love. It has to do with buying silver patterns and china patterns, and it has to do with choosing a wedding resort in the Poconos where they have heart-shaped bathtubs or heart-shaped water beds or whatever. And it seems that the whole marriage is an occasion for a kind of orgy of consumerism. First you choose your silver pattern, then you choose your resort hotel in the Poconos, and somehow, after you've chosen all that, you may choose a groom who is trotted out at the last minute as a kind of tailor's dummy to give an excuse to buy silver and china and so on. And he seems like the man, the odd man out. I mean, he's just sort of dragged into all of this. And I thought this was very sad and very funny, and I wrote a poem about marriage as seen by Broad's magazine. Here comes a flip through Broad's. The silver spoons were warbling their absurd musical names when, drawing back her veil illusion, she stepped into the Valentine-shaped bathtub and slid her perfect bubbles in between the perfect bubbles. Oh, brilliantly complex as compound interest, her diamond gleams forever on the edge of a wedding cake-shaped bed. What happens there is merely icing, since a snake pit of dismembered douchebag coils, all writhing, awaits her on the tackier back pages. Dearly beloved, let's hymn her and Daddy down the aisle with epithalamions composed for ovulin ads. It's the right of every married couple to wait, to space, to wait, and antistrophes appended by the Pope. Good grief, the groom! Has she or we entirely forgot? She'll dream him whole, American type, with ushers, halfbacks, headaches, drawbacks, backaches, and borrowed suit stuffed in a borrowed face. Or was it the reverse? Oh well, here's he, part koi pajamas, part mothered underwear, and of course an enormous prick full of money. The prick full of money is the chief thing. You know, sometimes you'll write a whole poem just for one line like This is another poem from the first book. It's called The Man Under the Bed. And it also appeared in Fear of Flying. I have this habit of attributing my own poems to Isadora Wing, my alter ego, who always gets them from time to time and sort of uses them for all they're worth. The Man Under the Bed was written in an attempt to tame that fantasy which so many of us have had, the fantasy that one has as a little child, that there is a boogeyman under the bed. And I always thought, as with so many fantasies, that this fantasy was my exclusive property, that no one else in the world had ever experienced it. And then I wrote this poem, and I had an experience that was very, very valuable to me as a writer. I discovered that when I went around to colleges and I read it, people would come up to me and say, I too had this fantasy. I too thought I was the only one. And that gave me a great deal of courage. It gave me the courage to know, I guess as every writer must know, that if you can come in touch with your own feelings and your own fantasies, you can reach other people as well. Because most of our fantasies and daydreams are rather ordinary in a way, ordinary maybe in the best sense, and we share them with most of the world. So the man under the bed is that man who waits for you, that boogeyman who waits under your bed. And my attempt to tame him was this poem. The man under the bed, the man who has been there for years waiting, the man who waits for my floating bare foot, the man who is silent as dust balls riding the darkness, the man whose breath is the breathing of small white butterflies, the man whose breathing I hear when I pick up the phone, the man in the mirror whose breath blackens silver, the bone man in closets who rattles the mothballs, the man at the end of the line. I met him tonight. I always meet him. He stands in the amber air of a bar. When the shrimp curl like beckoning fingers and ride through the air on their toothpick skewers, when the ice cracks and I am about to fall through, he arranges his face around its hollows. He opens his pupilless eyes at me. For years he has waited to drag me down, and now he tells me he has only waited to take me home. We waltz through the street like Death and the Maiden. We float through the wall of my room. If he's my dream, he will fall back into my body. His breath writes letters of mist on the glass of my cheeks. I wrap myself around him like the darkness. I breathe into his mouth and make him real. There's another poem from Half-Lives, which I'm rather fond of. It's a poem called Mother. And it's really an attempt to define that utterly ambivalent relationship that exists between mothers and daughters. And it is a kind of interesting relationship. I think the reason that the passions between mothers and daughters are so bitter often is that mothers and daughters sort of think they're part of the same person, and they have to fight each other in order to define themselves. They're almost like twins. They are almost like the hero of Conrad's Secret Sharer and his secret sharer. They never know where one begins and the other leaves off. And so much of the love and the hatred and the bitterness between mothers and daughters comes from this kind of fusing of identities. I have written many, many poems about my mother. This is only one of them. It seems to me that in every stage of my life, she's a different woman. And when people ask me that inevitable question that's always asked about my work, is it autobiographical? I always say, well, yes, it is, and no, it isn't, because the person I perceive as my mother keeps shifting. The person I give as the mother of the heroine of my novel is not quite the mother I see today. She's an exaggeration. She's frozen in time. She's fixed in a certain way. And I can say that as the same for the mother in this poem. She is one of those many mothers in my life. Mother, ash falls on the roof of my house. I have cursed you enough in the lines of my poems and between them, in the silences which fall like ash flakes on the water tank from a smog-bound sky. I have cursed you because I remember the smell of joy on a sealskin coat, and because I feel more abandoned than a baby seal on an ice floe red with its mother's blood. I have cursed you as I walked and prayed on a concrete terrace high above the street, because whatever I pulled down with my bruised hand from the bruising sky, whatever lovely plum came to my mouth, you envied and spat out. Because you saw me in your image, because you favored me, you punished me. It was only a form of you my poems were seeking. Neither of us knew. For years we lived together in a single skin. We shared fur coats. We hated each other as the soul hates the body for being weak, as the mind hates the stomach for needing food, as one lover hates the other. I kicked in the pouch of your theories like a baby kangaroo. I believed you on Marx, on Darwin, on Tolstoy and Shaw. I said I loved Pushkin. You loved him. I vowed Monet was better than Bosch. Who cared? I would have said nonsense to please you, and frequently did. This took the form, of course, of fighting you. We fought so gorgeously. We fought like one boxer and his punching bag. We fought like mismatched twins. We fought like the secret sharer and his shade. Now we're apart. Time doesn't heal the baby to the womb. Separateness is real and keeps on growing. One by one, the mothers drop away. The lovers leave, the babies outgrow clothes. Some get insomnia, the poet's disease, and sit up nights nursing at the nipples of their pens. I have made hot milk and kissed you where you are. I have cursed my curses. I have cleared the air. And now I sit here writing, breathing you. In Love Root, the third book of poems, I wrote a whole section of poems which are letters to people in my life who helped me become a poet. And most of them are letters to dead poets. Some of them are letters to members of my family who helped me in particular ways. And the section is called Mash Notes to the Dead and Letters to the Living. It's my belief that we communicate, that poets communicate with each other through the pages of books, that I can speak to Keats as easily as I can speak to my own mother, which shouldn't surprise you, and that we pass the words along from one to another. There is communication that goes beyond the grave. And I tried to write a whole section of poems in this book in which I paid my debts to the people I loved. I wrote a poem to Keats, and a poem to Mary Wollstonecraft, and a poem to Colette, and certain poems to certain members of my family who had helped me in various ways to become a poet. And I'd like to read you a few of the poems that were so crucial to me. The first one I want to read is the poem to Colette, which is called Dear Colette. You know, the story of women writers in this world is very sad. We look for our so-called role models, a word that I really hate, and we see Sylvia Plath sticking her head in the oven at the age of 31. And we see Charlotte Bronte dying in childbirth, Mary Wollstonecraft dying in childbirth. And we don't find many women that we can relate to. We see Tsvetaeva, Virginia Woolf, all committing suicide. And then we look to Colette, And there's a model of a woman who chronicles every stage of a woman's life, who writes about a young woman, who writes about a woman in her 20s, who writes about woman's middle age, and who goes on writing till the age of 81, crippled with arthritis, and who leaves behind her more than 50 books. And somehow the life of Colette is an inspiration, as the lives of other women writers aren't. Maybe because she is so full of life, and maybe because her main life is writing, and she never stops writing. And I've always considered her my muse in some strange way. This is a poem for Colette as my muse. Dear Colette, I want to write to you about being a woman, for that is what you write to me. I want to tell you how your face, enduring after 30, 40, 50, hangs above my desk like my own muse. I want to tell you how your hands reach out from your books and seize my heart. I want to tell you how your hair electrifies my thoughts like my own halo. I want to tell you how your eyes penetrate my fear and make it melt. I want to tell you simply that I love you, though you are dead and I am still alive. Suicides and spinsters, all our kind, even decorous Jane Austen never marrying, and Sappho leaping, and Sylvia in the oven, and Anna Wickham, Svetaeva, Sarah Teasdale, and pale Virginia floating like Ophelia, and Emily alone, alone, alone. But you endure and marry, go on writing, lose a husband, gain a husband, go on writing, sing and tap dance and you go on writing, have a child and still you go on writing, love a woman, love a man and go on writing. You endure your writing and your life. Dear Colette, I only want to thank you for your eyes ringed with bluest paint like bruises, for your hair gathering sparks like brush fire, for your hands which never willingly let go, for your years, your child, your lovers, all your books. Dear Colette, you hold me to this life. There's another poem in this section which is not to a writer, but to my sister Claudia. And it's really a poem about the evil eye. It's called For Claudia Against Narrowness. And I'll tell you a little something about the genesis of this poem because it's sort of interesting to me where poems come from. I have a younger sister who's about 5 years younger, and with whom I share all the family neuroses, as sisters do, except that we take them out in different ways. And from time to time, Claudia and I have an evening in which we share something special. And this poem came out of one of those evenings. Claudia was then pregnant with her second child, and she called me in the middle of the night and she said, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but I'm sure that I'm carrying a monster. The child surely has 4 fingers on each hand, maybe 3. Perhaps it's a cyclops. Perhaps it's a mongoloid idiot. And I'm just sure of it." And we had one of those long, sisterly, reassuring conversations in which I reassured her that she wasn't going to give birth to a mongoloid baby. And she reassured me that even though I had a bestseller, I was not going to get cancer and die. And the parallelism is very significant. We both have a great fear of success. Claudia wanted desperately to have a baby. I wanted desperately to have a bestseller. Once these things happened to both of us, we were both sure that we had terminal illnesses. So I began to think about this fear of success, this fear of life, this fear of pregnancy, this fear of entering fully into all the aspects of life. And I decided that basically it was a fear of the evil eye. You know, all Jewish people, and perhaps many who aren't Jewish, believe that if they ever show the gods that they're happy in some way, it's really dangerous because then you will surely be punished. And God forbid you should sell a lot of books. Then something bad will really happen. God forbid you should have a beautiful baby. then you're just standing in line for the ultimate disaster and tragedy. So I decided it was time to write a poem for my sister and against the evil eye. And this is the poem. I address my sister in the poem, but of course I really address myself. For Claudia, against narrowness. Narrowing life because of the fears, narrowing it between the dust motes, narrowing the pink baby between the green-limbed monsters and the drooling idiots and the ghosts of thalidomide infants, narrowing hope, always narrowing hope. Mother sits on one shoulder hissing, life is dangerous. Father sits on the other sighing, lucky you. Grandmother, grandfather, big sister, you'll die if you leave us. You'll die if you ever leave us. Sweetheart, baby sister, you'll die anyway, and so will I. Even if you walk the wide greensward, even if you and your beautiful big belly embrace the world of men and trees, even if you moan with pleasure and smoke the sweet grass and feast on strawberries in bed, you'll die anyway, wide or narrow, you're going to die. As long as you're at it, die wide, follow your belly to the green pasture, lie down in the sun's dapple. Life is not as dangerous as Mother said. It is more dangerous, more wide. I love that poem. I should have called it Advice to Myself. You know? The other poem in this series is a poem for Walt Whitman. It's called Testament, or Homage to Walt Whitman. You know, Walt Whitman does in Leaves of Grass the thing that is most difficult for every poet, which is he says I. And even if that I is a persona, which it may well be, nevertheless, it is something infinitely terrifying for a poet to stand up and say, I, Walt, or I, Erica, or I, anyone. I mean, it's very hard. And to sort of declare yourself and declare who you are. When I was in college, I detested Walt Whitman. I hated him. I thought he was simple-minded. I thought he was silly. I thought his poems were gross compared to the poems of Wallace Stevens, for example. I didn't understand at that point that the kind of directness that he had in his poetry was something that one only came to after going through many forms of ornateness, that you had to learn to be that direct, that no one knew how to be that direct in college. This was something you could only know in your middle 30s or later. And when I came to Walt Whitman, I was past 30, and I had loved poets like Wallace Stevens for many years, and I had loved other kinds of poets like John Donne for many years. And suddenly Whitman's directness struck me as that proverbial breath of fresh air. I suddenly understood why he was such an important American poet, and why what he did was so hard, and why he had been ignored, in fact, by a whole generation of American poets, while in South America, poets like Neruda were learning the lesson of Whitman. But in a sense, we couldn't deal with Whitman because he was so direct, because he dealt with feelings so head-on. And when I came to him, I understood why he was such an important poet. And I wrote this poem called Testament, or Homage to Walt Whitman, which is again to myself in some sense. I, Erica Jong, in the midst of my life, having had 2 parents, 2 sisters, 2 husbands, 2 books of poems, and 3 decades of pain, having cried for those who did not love me, and those who loved me but not enough, and those whom I did not love, declare myself now for joy. There is pain enough to nourish us everywhere. It is joy that is scarce. There are corpses piled up to the mountains, and tears to drown in, and bile enough to swallow all day long. Rage is a common weed. Anger is cheap. Righteous indignation is the religion of the dead, in the house of the dead, where the dead speak to each other in creaking voices, each arguing a more unhappy childhood than the other. Unhappiness is cheap. Childhood is a universal affliction. I say to hell with the analysts of minus and plus, the life shrinkers, the diminishers of joy. I say to hell with anyone who would suck on misery like a pacifier in a toothless mouth. I say to hell with gloom. Gloom is cheap. Every night the earth resolves for darkness and then breaks its resolve in the morning. Every night the demon lovers come with their black penises like tongues, with their double faces and their cheating mouths and their glum religions of doom. Doom is cheap. If the apocalypse is coming, let us wait for it in joy. Let us not gnash our teeth on the molars of corpses, though the molars of corpses are plentiful enough. Let us not scorn laughter, though scorn is plentiful enough. Let us laugh and bring plenty to the scorners, for they scorn themselves. I myself have been a scorner and have chosen scornful men, men to echo all that was narrow in myself. Men to hurt me as I hurt myself. In my stinginess, my friends have been stingy. In my narrowness, my men have been mean. I resolve now for joy. If that resolve means I must live alone, I accept aloneness. If the joy house I inhabit must be a house of my own making, I accept that making. No doom-saying, death-dealing fucker of cunts can undo me now. No joy denier can deny me now. For what I have is undeniable. I inhabit my own house, the house of my joy. Unscrew the locks from the doors. Unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Dear Walt Whitman, horny old nurse to pain, speaker of passwords primeval, merit refuser, poet of body and soul. I scorned you at 20, but turn to you now in the 4th decade of my life, having grown straight enough to praise your straightness, and plain enough to speak to you, and simple enough